Today we're going to talk about surface areas and volumes of spheres. So we haven't talked at all about spheres because of course they're a three-dimensional object and they're kind of unlike any other object. So we kind of saved everything for this final lesson in this unit. So we want you to learn how to find the surface area as well as the volume of a sphere. Let's first define what a sphere is. A sphere is the set of all points in space that are equidistant from a given point called our center. A sphere has both radius and diameter, okay? So that radius is the distance from the center of that sphere, and all points on that sphere have the same radius. And then the diameter is the distance through that center that connects any 2 points on the sphere. So when a sphere and a plane intersect, they intersect in what's called a circle. And it doesn't matter where this plane is, whether it's directly through the equator of that sphere or if it's off to one side of it. But if it is through that equator of the sphere and passes through the center, if that plane passes through the center of that sphere, then the circle that's created is called the great circle, and it has the circumference of the sphere, okay? So the great circle divides a sphere into halves, and those halves are called hemispheres. Now let's talk about the surface area of a sphere. The equation for the surface area of a sphere is 4 times pi times the radius squared. So 4 pi r squared. How do you remember if it's r squared? Well, r is the only dimension, and of course surface area is a squared measurement, and so r squared is going to be what we use for our surface area. Here we have a radius of 9.7 inches. So our surface area will be 4 pi times 9.7 inches squared, which gives us a total of 376.36 pi inches squared. Okay? So if we wanted to have the surface area of one of the sphere's hemispheres, we would just divide that in half. So the surface area of a hemisphere would just be 2 pi r squared. And so half of that surface area of the hemisphere would be 188.18 pi inches squared. Okay? Now let's talk about volume of a sphere. Volume of a sphere is kind of different. It's a weird formula. It's 4/3, so 1 1/3 times pi times our radius cubed. Okay, and you can remember radius cubed is because volume is in cubic units. So if we find the volume of this same sphere, it's going to be 4/3 pi times my 9.7 inches cubed. And so I'm going to cube 9.7, I'm going to multiply by 4, I'm going to divide by 3, and I get 1216.9 pi inches cubed. And of course, if I wanted to find the volume of one of the hemispheres, just half a sphere, I could divide that into 2, and I get 608.4 pi inches cubed. Okay, so the volume of a hemisphere is just 2/3 pi r cubed. Okay, now we want to do a different type of problem, and this is using volume to find your surface area. Okay, so since surface area and volume have the same variable, which is radius in each of their equations, if we know surface area or volume, we can find the other one through that common radius. Okay, so let's talk about volume. Volume has an equation of V equals 4/3 pi r cubed, right? Well, if we know our volume is 84.67 centimeters cubed, then we can write it into our equation like this using substitution. Okay? Now, Isolating r is a little bit weird, but we can do this. First, we're going to multiply by the reciprocal of our fraction, so we're going to multiply by 3/4, okay? And that is going to allow this fraction to be canceled out. So we're just left with pi r cubed will equal, and that's 84.67 times 3, and then divided by 4. And that'll be 138.50. Now we need to divide by our pi. And so we get r cubed is equal to 44.09. Now, to find r, I need to take the cube root of r cubed, both sides actually. And you usually have a function for that on your calculator. So r is going to equal 3 centimeters. Okay? Now I have my radius. I can use that to find surface area. So surface area of a sphere is going to equal 4 pi r squared. Since our radius is 3.53, we're going to square that. And multiply by 4. And now multiply by pi again. And so we get our surface area is 156.8 centimeters squared for that sphere. Okay? So with a volume of 84.67 centimeters cubed, we have a surface area of 156.8 centimeters squared. And don't let the difference of the scale of those numbers freak you out, okay? Because remember, we're dealing with two different units. Centimeters cubed is a whole lot different than centimeters squared. Now let's talk about using surface area to find volume. This is the reverse of that. So my surface area is 4 pi r squared. And if I know that my surface area is 144 inches squared, now I can take that and divide by 4 pi. So 100. Okay, so I'm going to take 144 and divide by 4, divide by pi, and I get r squared is equal to 11.46. Now I take the square root of r and the square root of this, and I get r equals 3.39 inches. Now I can use that in my volume formula. So that's going to be 4/3 times pi times that 3.39 inches for my radius cubed. So I cube that, and I multiply by 4, I multiply by pi, and I divide by 3, and I get my volume is 162.49 inches cubed for my sphere. Okay? I could have left it in terms of pi. I chose not to because I already had so many decimals. But if you didn't have a lot of decimals, I would say don't leave it, or just go ahead and leave it in terms of pi. We have learned how to find surface area and volume of spheres. We've learned how to use surface area to find volume and how to use volume to find surface area. And we've learned that's because they have that one variable in common, which is our radius, okay? We've also learned to find surface area and volume of hemispheres. So that's it for today.